Oh. Om Satchidanandarupaya Vishvotpathyadihetave Tapatraya Vinashaya Shri Krishnaya Vayam Numaha. Janmadyasya yatonvayaditarataschaarteshvabhignaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayaha Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Dharma Projita Kaitavotra Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam Vedyam Vastavamatra Vastu Shivadam Tapatrayon Mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim Vaparerishwaraha Sadyo Hridyavarudyate Trakritibihi Shushrushubi Tachanat. Hari Om and greetings from Niagara Falls. Our whole class today will be filled with toughness and hope, so we don't need to invest a minute, we're investing a full hour. The best shishyas, or disciples, are those who do without asking. The middle type of disciples do upon asking. The bad disciples, upon asking, do, but do carelessly. And the worst type of disciples, upon asking, do the opposite. And in Bhagavatam, they're actually not called disciples. They're called excreta. Excreta means like urine and feces, correct? Who decides whether to follow or not? Does the Sadguru decide or does the Shishya decide in terms of following? It is the Shishya, correct? When we do not practice what we know, when we do not follow in a overt way or covert way, whatever we know, a hole is placed in that. And this starts to leak. Practicing plugs that hole and strengthens all that you know. Our course is on Bhagavat, devotion, or bhakti. And this is greater than Bhagavat darshan. I'm playing on the words devotion and darshan. You know why? Darshan can be taken away. We studied that with Raja Dhruva. He saw Bhagwan within himself, and then that was taken away from him. Bhagavat devotion, who's in control of that? You are. And no one can take that away. The 9th skanda focuses on Ishanu Katha. And that is a poetic term. The practicality of this section is Vasana Kshaya, Vasana Parivartana, and Vasana Nasha. Kshaya means exhaustion, Parivartana means substitution, and Nasha means disidentification. As we complete the 9th skanda, you should know why we began the 9th skanda. In the last class, I tried to emphasize the genesis of love. The seed starts with giving. Giving some of your resources, time, and effort. And the way I postulated this to you is all of the acquaintances in your lives who have become friends, you gave more time to them, correct? Effort could be openness. In that giving, you start to know more. Acquaintances become friends when you know more about them. Arranged marriages become love marriages when you know more about them. And that knowing evolves to loving. Bhagavat Bhakti, or Bhagavat devotion. This is disidentification. When you love Bhagwan more than you, don't you disidentify from your body vasanas, your mind vasanas? We love our egos the most right now. We keep thinking about ourselves in a relative way, speaking about ourselves in a relative way. How do you engage in vasana nasha? Love God. How? Know God. How? Give yourself to God. This is why in the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, when you build or buy a new home, before you enter, you have to establish Bhagwan. This is Bhagwan's home first, then your home. Otherwise, you get stuck or identify with that home, right? Keep on refurbishing it. Do you refurbish your love towards Bhagwan? Clear? The end of this skanda, we've been focusing on Bhagwan Rama. Bhagavati Sita, when she lived in the jungle, pregnant, this was at Rishi Valmikiji's ashram. The Valmikiji, who documented the original Ramayana, documented it because the original Ramayana is actually from Bhagwan Shiva. He narrated this to Devi Parvati. But the first to write it was Valmikiji. Isn't she lucky to live in such an ashram? You've heard me in the last 12 years talk about Sandipani 1,000 times, 10,000 times. She lived with Rishi Valmiki. And she had 2 sons. Some say Kusha is the older one. Some say Lava is the older one. I feel Kusha is the older one. Kusha because that's the grass that was prevalent in the ashram. This is a sacred grass. Kusha was more like his father, that is Bhagwan Rama. He looked like him. He had darker skin like him. Lava means part of or pieces of. And so much of nature and puja was happening in the ashram, there was pieces of grass everywhere. So he came to be known as Lava. He looked more like his mother. He was lighter in color. So that really completes as if Bhagavan Rama's lineage. Then we continued on, based on Bhagavatam, to another Rama, Parashu Rama. We don't know a lot about him, and what we do know about him tends to be unappealing. After he had destroyed Raja Arjuna, and his father told him, his father was a rishi, Jamadagni, be patient. And you're not patient enough, so what you need to do right now is go on a yatra. And for an entire year, Parashurama, he traveled throughout Bharat, living simply, invoking patience. Once when he had come back, his mother had gone to collect water from a river. They lived in the jungle. And there was a Gandharva there. His name is Chitraratha. In today's class, I'm going to share a lot of names with you. If you can document them, good. If you cannot document them, no worries. This is being recorded. If you're not going to watch the recording, don't worry anyways. What's the point in worrying? Just listen and enjoy. And his mother, for a moment, was caught up in how this Gandharva, who was in this river, was quite handsome and was enjoying with other Gandharvas there, singing, dancing, etc. And Rishi Jamadagni, when she came back, asked him, he asked her, what were you thinking about? And he knew, and she knew, this distraction. So at that point, he asked their children, I want you to destroy your mother. And no one did other than Rama, Parashurama. He did this immediately. And upon doing this, he had destroyed his mother. His father was quite pleased and asked, what do you want? And he said, bring back my mother to life and make sure she felt like she was just sleeping. And he was so happy, and he immediately did that. And the beauty of these details, number one is, Parashurama knew the greatness of his father, that of a rishi. He knew this was all going to happen, that his father was not acting out of anger. See, if you read this as a comic, then you think, oh, Sanatana Dharma is so violent. Husbands and wives hate each other. Yes, it's so politicized then. His father was happy because he also knew that this was going to happen. And how lovingly he wanted his mother to feel like she was just sleeping, because if she knew those details, maybe she would have felt bad towards her son, correct? But she just went to sleep and woke up. So understand and appreciate that Parashurama is patient. He learned patience, obedience, and he is Chiranjeevi, still alive. He was pleased with Acharya Bhishma at how devoted he was and skilled. He taught Raja Karna. I talked about that last week. This is the beauty of Bhagavan, is that if you become quiet enough, you can see him not just inside but outside too. We continue. Again, a lot of names coming towards you, a lot of details. Just enjoy. For this section, you don't have to write anything. There was a king, his name is Yayati. And he was married to a Devi, her name is Devayani. And this Devi got into an argument with another Devi, her name is Sharmishta. And what had happened was when Yayati married Devayani, Devayani's condition was that Sharmishta must come as my dasi. I'm sharing some of these details with you because you've seen plays on this. You've watched Indian serials on this. So she goes as a dasi. And this Yayati, he ended up being with both of these Devis. And with Devayani, he had a child whose name was Yadu. And other children, but just focus on that. And with Sharmishta, he had a child named Puru. Yadu and Puru. Okay? Now, he was cursed to become old even though he was young. And he asked his children, two of them being Yadu and Puru, for them to take on his jara, his old age. So they would become old, he would become young. And Yadu said no. Puru said yes. And Puru took on that old age, and Yayati stayed young, or became young. And during this time, what did he do? Lived indulgently. He lived as a basta. A basta is a goat. One who only eats and drinks and pretends to be merry. And through all of this indulgence, what he realized is this craving for pleasure makes one shallow. See what he was asking of his children? Would you do that for anyone you love? That you should become old, you should become sick so I can enjoy. We heard the exact opposite about Rantideva, correct? He said, I want to become old and sick so other people don't have to become old and sick. This is why I'm highlighting this personality, to bring out the glory of Rantideva. He realized how shallow he had become, and there's one lovely detail where he realizes all of the relationships we have in life, all of us are just wayside travelers. You know when you're at the airport and someone's in front of you that's getting onto the plane and someone's behind you, or you're sitting beside someone? They're wayside travelers, right? You smile, you control more elbow room. And there's trivialities that you talk about. All of our relationships are like that. Our grandparents, our parents, our siblings, our kids, our grandkids. And to feel otherwise is like being a goat. Eating, drinking, pretending to be merry. In that realization, he goes back to Puru and says, now give me that old age. Indulging is futile. You become young. And that completes that portion of Srimad Bhagavatam. You've heard this before. That's why I wanted to bring this to your attention, where all of this is sourced. Now more coming at you. Raja Dushyanta. He's in the jungle and he sees Devi Shakuntala. And they get married in an informal way. It's called Gandharva Vivaha. And he goes back to the kingdom and she stays in the jungle and gives birth to Bharata. And this Bharata is praised so much in Bhagavatam. When he was growing up, he used to play with lions. And what is shared is, so great was Bharata that no one in the past or future will ever match him. So the details of Dushyanta and Shakuntala also in Bhagavatam. Continuing. Now we move on to Rantideva. He and his family, they lived most simply. So unlike us. For 48 days, they had not consumed any water or any food. They were so identified with Bhagavan that they didn't need water or food. At the end of those 48 days, someone had brought them payasa, kheer, pudding. And even receiving that, his hands were trembling. When you're so tired, you shake like that. And he had divided all of this amongst his family. And as is usual, who showed up? It's like in Bhagavata, whenever someone's hungry, other hungry people come. So who shows up? A Brahmana. So that Brahmana takes a majority of that payasa. And they're so hungry, fine. Any payasa is fine. Who shows up next? A Shudra. They give the majority of their food to that Shudra. So a thinker, a worker. Who comes next? A hunter with his dogs. So now all of the food is given now. Not just to the hunter, but to the dogs also. They only have a glass of water left. And they're about to complete their fast. And a Chandala comes. A Chandala is someone who eats dogs. And they give that water to him. And now I'm going to read to you in English his prayer as he's giving this water, how happy he is. I do not pray to the Lord for a state in which I shall be endowed with the eightfold powers, nor even for the state of liberation from the cycle of birth and death. I desire only to abide within all beings and undergo the sufferings that accrue to them. By my taking over their sufferings, they will be free from misery. By supplying the life-giving water to a man panting for it in great distress, I have been freed of all sufferings, hunger, thirst, exhaustion, ailments, misery, sorrow, and confusion. For true happiness lies in suffering for others. Remember what the purpose of this skanda is. Vasana nasha. If one is so dedicated to creation, to the Creator, what happens to those vasanas? What vasanas? They have no power over one. That's disidentification. And what a great parent that his children would become like that too. As parents, we keep taking our kids on more vacations, correct? What we need to do with our kids is teach them to be more tough, more self-dependent. Rantideva, complete. We continue. Other great personalities that you've heard of. Devi Ahalya is introduced. Acharya Kripa is introduced. Devi Draupadi is introduced. Raja Kuru is introduced. Kuru is the one who looked after Kurukshetra. So Kurukshetra was named after Raja Kuru. Then a child was born, and when born, was born in two parts. And there was a Rakshasi, an Asuri, her name was Jara. And she put those parts together, and that baby came to be known as Jarasandha. Again, a popular name that you've come across. We're also introduced to Mahabhishak. Mahabhishak had the power, anything he touched became young. Imagine what a cool friend that would be. And when entities became young, trees, grass, animals, people, they started to feel shanti. Right? Think of how carefree someone who is young is. So his name became Shantanu. Shantanu, the one who makes all feel shanti. That again is a personality that you've heard of. We're also introduced to Acharya Bhishma, and we're introduced to Krishna Dvaipayana. What is Krishna Dvaipayana's more popular name? Vyasa. And Vyasa gave birth to Shuka. Isn't this amazing? That Raja Parikshita is asking Rishi Shuka, what should a dying man do? And he's explaining who I am, as in Rishi Shuka. He goes on to explain, this is who you are. And he essentially is sharing that we all come from the Surya Vamsha and or the Chandra Vamsha. Remember that you're sons and daughters of the rishis. We are children of God. We continue. A Devi, and I'm going to get into her name shortly, she was gifted the power of Devahuti. Devahuti is one who, whatever is offered, that Deva comes to be. What is her name? She was born as, I'm still waiting for one of you two to share the answer. She was born as Pritha. Pritha. She was given the gift of invoking the Devas. And she didn't believe that she had this gift. You know who gave her this gift? Your friend Rishi Durvasa. The one that we're always questioning. So she questioned him too. So she thought, okay, who's the most powerful of them all? Let's try Surya. So she invoked Surya, and Surya gave her the child that is Karna. But some of the details before this is she had this child and she didn't want this child. She wasn't ready. So she put him down a river. And there was a citizen, his name is Adiratha. This Adiratha collected this child and he came to be known as Karna. So Karna doesn't have at least known, strong heritage. That was a big cause for his insecurity, is that he felt that this is his family. When if he went deeper, but he didn't know that his father is actually the son. His mother is Pritha. We're also introduced to Dhritarashtra, to Pandu, and Vidura. Vidura we've already met. He's one of the listeners in Bhagavatam. Checked so far. You know many of these personalities. Now we're getting into the build-up. Devaka had a daughter whose name was... Think, Devaka had a daughter whose name was Devaki. Devaki. Devaka's brother's name is Ugrasena. And one of his sons is Kamsa. He is one who really moves this katha along. And Marisha, this is a Devi, she had a son named Vasudeva. So now we know how Devi Devaki was born and Deva Vasudeva was born. Deva Vasudeva's father, his name is Shura. He had a daughter named Pritha, whom I mentioned earlier, and he gave that daughter to his friend Kunti Bhoja. So she came to be known as Kunti. Okay? We're also told that Hiranyaksha, during this whole period, manifested as Danta Vaktra. I always thought it was Danta Vakra, but it's actually Danta Vaktra. That name is listed in Bhagavatam. And Hiranyakashipu became Shishupala. We know all of that. Okay. Now, our shlokas. Are you ready? We listened to that in our song a couple of weeks ago. And the singer says, I am ready. We're obviously in the 9th skanda, the 24th adhyaya. This is the last adhyaya of this skanda. And I'm reading shloka 56. You have heard a similar shloka in Ramayana. You've definitely heard a similar shloka in Bhagavad Gita. 9:24:56. Yada yadeha dharmasya kshayo vridhischa papmanaha tada tu bhagavan isha atmanam srijate harihi. Whenever there is a decline in dharma and there's a maturity in papa or unrighteousness, then Bhagavan Isha. Those words Bhagavan and Isha are synonyms. Why use both? Isha is the one who controls themselves. And that's important because Atmanam Srijate Harihi, Bhagavan Narayana manifests. Srijate means manifests. Atmanam on his own account. Later on in this section, and here, this is the foreshadowing for Bhagavan Krishna, okay? There's a whole section in this last chapter that goes through Bhagavan Krishna's entire life in like half a page. And then you have 2 cantos that elaborate on that. And I'm looking for a nod. You can hear me and see me clearly. Can you feel me clearly? Bhagavan Krishna was not born, and definitely not born due to karma, like we are. Bhagavan Krishna manifested simply to bless us. Remember that. We always assign purpose to Bhagavan. Humans have purpose. Bhagavan has no purpose. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean that in a transcendental way. Bhagavan manifests just to bless us. And we need this. You know all of the details I shared with you about Dantavaktra and Kamsa. That's not to confuse you, but asuras. Asuras have disguised themselves as leaders. Don't we feel that right now? If you can just think about what has happened, is happening in Lebanon. Correct? Selfishness. And these leaders don't just lead countries, they lead families. You saw how Ravana was in Lanka, Bhagavan Rama was in Bharata, but in the time of Bhagavan Krishna, Devi Devaki and Kamsa are brother and sister or cousins. In one's own family, there's so much selfishness. And we justify that. We justify that by forgetting that we have to live for community, society, humanity, divinity. This morning in Meaningful Mornings, I was sharing that many grandparents have just become babysitters, nannies. Instead of living for society, humanity, divinity. in this brief on Bhagavan Krishna's life, all those who saw Bhagavan Krishna became annoyed with their eyelids. What an amazing detail. They became annoyed with their eyelids because there'd be moments when they couldn't see Bhagavan. Some of you are asking, how come he's known as Ramachandra, Krishna Chandra, correct? It's not because of the Surya Vamsha or Chandra Vamsha. There's many reasons why. But the reason you should remember is Chandra here means full moon. When you see a full moon, do you ever look away? You just want to keep looking at that full moon, right? That's why that Bhagavan Rama was that Chandra that everyone in Ayodhya wanted to see. And then when he left, they were like zombies until he came back. And Bhagavan Krishna is the same, as I'm sharing. Bhagavan Krishna lived worshipping Bhagavan. Who is Bhagavan? Himself. He lived offering puja to himself. Bhagavan Krishna lived the Vedic culture which he himself authored. See the humility. He's worshipping himself. He's following what he himself has shared for us, not for him. Bhagavan Krishna is Bhakta Vatsala. Bhakta Vatsala is compared to a cow and a calf. When a calf is just born, that calf is quite physiologically dirty, with blood and other bodily fluids, and falls to the ground, correct? Let's say mud and stones. And what does that cow do then? Licks it all off. We are like that calf that is impure, and I mean that through vasanas. I'm not calling anyone a sinner. We are not sinners. But we identify with our vasanas. And Bhagavan comes to clean that all up. What he did to Putana. Putana means no puta. Na means no. Puta means purity. What did he do to her? He made her puta. Correct? He disidentified her vasanas. You're going to find so many times that Bhagavan was crying when he came across bhaktas. When he saw that 5-year-old boy Dhruva, Bhagavan was crying. That there's such a being who identifies more with me than themselves. The last shloka we'll study of the 9th skanda, because the 10th skanda is not a foreshadowing of Bhagavan Krishna's birth and life. It is his birth and life. 9th skanda, 24th adhyaya. So same chapter, the 62nd shloka. This is one of the last shlokas. This is for you. Yasmin satkarna piyushe yashastirtavare sakrit Shrotranjalir upasprishya dhunute karma vasanam. Yasmin, whoever, satkarna piyushe, listens with their ears, listens carefully. Remember our active listening test? That was a build-up to this shloka. Yashaha tirtavare sakrit. This water, it's compared to water. You're drinking this water with your ears, is a yatra, is the best river water. Shrotranjalir upasprishya. Anyone who touches this, dhunute, what will be burned up? What will be destroyed? Nasha, karma vasanam. Their karmas, their vasanas. Ishanu Katha, when listen to how Raja Ambarisha lived, to how Bhagwan Parashurama lived, when we love them more than ourselves, what karma? What vasana? Iti Navamaha Skandaha Samaptaha. Hari Om Tat Sat. Oh.